Well, Casey, I know you are a big foodie. You're always telling me what restaurants to go to. We went out to dinner this week and, you had gotten the clam chowder. I don't know where I'm going with
That's
this.
a classic foodie thing to do, is to get the chowder. Actually, the most foodie thing about me, Kevin, is that many weeks after the show, we go downstairs and we eat a sandwich from the Subway Corporation, which is known for their exquisite gourmet delicacies.
No, but you are a foodie. I know this
Yeah.
about you. And so this week, there was an article in the New York Times that made me think, well, I got to talk about that with Casey.
Yes, and I love this story too. It comes from Pete Wells, the great former food critic for the New York Times, who is now a food writer at the paper. And he had a great piece about how some of America's most famous chefs are starting to use AI in their work.
So because this is going to be a segment about AI policy, let's do our disclosures. I work for the New York Times Company, which is suing OpenAI and Microsoft.
And my boyfriend works for Anthropic.
Okay, I love this genre of story that we started to see about like how people in a specific occupation or field are using AI. My sort of intuition is that you could do a version of this story for almost every profession, like how people are actually using this stuff, because people are using this stuff and they're not always talking about how. And so I think it is a valuable service and a valuable journalistic mission to go into various industries and say, hey, what are you doing with this stuff?
Exactly. And look, a lot of our listeners, they're going out to restaurants, and there is now the possibility that you're eating dishes that have been crafted or at least assisted in their development with AI. And I thought it might be interesting to hear about how that works.
I wondered why I was seeing glue pizza on so many menus. Let's bring in Pete Wells.
Let's bring him in. Pete Wells, welcome to Hard Fork.
Well, hello.
So how did you get interested in how chefs are using artificial intelligence?
Well, there was this curious silence about it. Nobody was talking about it. So I wrote emails to a couple of chefs, and right away, one of them wrote back and said, I use it nonstop. It is my favorite kitchen tool. But strangely, none of the chefs I'm in touch with ever mention it to me. So he had the impression he was sort of the only one. And so of course I knew he can't be the only one. But so I started asking more people and got some pretty interesting responses back.
And tell us about this chef that you contacted who said that AI has become his favorite kitchen tool.
Oh, sure. This is Grant Achatz, whose famous restaurant is Alinea in Chicago, and he also has Next, and he's just in the fall opened a place called Fire, and he has been using it for all kinds of things. When he was opening Fire, the idea was that everything would be cooked in some way on or over or in flames, or coals or embers. And so he asked ChatGPT to sort of like, tell me some unusual cooking fuels from around the world and where it's used and what it's used for. And it started giving him back things like avocado pits and corn cobs, and some of which he knew about, but a lot of them he didn't. Of course, it also comes back with cow dung, which is a cooking fuel, but not one that you can like charge a lot of money for.
Yeah, I did that once in my house. Let's just say that smell's never coming out of the upholstery.
Yeah. One of the reasons that this is so interesting, Pete, is, Grant Achatz is one of the most famous chefs in America. Alinea, I think is one of its best restaurants. Have you ever eaten at Alinea, Kevin?
No, have you?
I have, and it's one of the great meals of my life. Pete, I imagine you've eaten there once or twice.
Yeah. I was writing about Grant before he opened Alinea, so I've been like paying attention to what he does for a really long time, and he is, probably one of the most focused on creativity and inventiveness. One of the chefs is most focused on that of anybody in the world.
Yeah. I think the last dish I had at Alinea was like an edible balloon that they had made. I mean, every dish at Alinea contains some sort of surprise, right? This is not like a steakhouse. Everything there is designed to be original, which is what made it so interesting to me that he is one of the people who is sort of at the vanguard of using AI in his cooking. I could imagine Grant Achatz saying, no, 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 this is the most precious thing to me are the ideas behind what is in my food. I'm going to make sure that's always coming from, sort of my own brain. What do you think it is that has made him and some other chefs say, oh, no, 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 this can actually be an excellent creative partner?
Well, he has always relied on collaboration. When I first met him before he opened Alinea, he had this crew, this like the wrecking crew of these bright, young, ambitious chefs. And every night after service was finished, like 11:30, when the kitchen is cleaned down, they would sit around a table and talk about ideas and like, what do you got? What do you got for like what if we did this? What if we tried that? And that's just always been a huge part of his process. So he's already like very accustomed to the idea of like ideas come from within, but they can also come from outside. They can come from traveling, some amazing meal that you had in Spain. They can come from a childhood memory of your grandmother, but they can also come from somebody else's childhood memory. They could also come from your sous chef's last trip, And it's not a huge step, at least for him, to start asking the same kinds of questions he would ask his sous chefs to type them into ChatGPT. When your sous chef suggests something, you think about it. It's not going to go straight on the menu anyway. You're all going to, critique it, discuss it, play around with it, elaborate it, refine it before it gets anywhere near the dining room. So, it I think made a kind of sense to him. Like, let's get this machine that can suggest crazy stuff sometimes, but will also suggest things that might turn out to be good with a tweak here and a change there. Let's just bring it into the process.
Now, Pete, you mentioned that you'd found, in addition to Grant Achatz, a bunch of other chefs who were using AI tools in the kitchen. What were some of the ways they were using them, and who are these chefs?
So there's Ned Baldwin, who has a restaurant in Manhattan called Houseman, and he sent me a whole bunch of transcripts of his conversations about sausage making and different things you can do to affect the texture of sausage, to make it firmer, to make it, if it's too firm, to make it a little softer. If you want that sort of springy, elastic feeling that you get in like Asian fish balls, which is its own thing, how do you get that? And then from there, like, okay, I've got my basic like recipe, but now I'd like to change the seasonings. Like, what would I do if I were making this in Malaysia, right? What are the spices I would bring into it?
Yeah, I mean, in our culture, chefs are often presented as these figures of towering authority who sort of know how to do anything. If you just sort of toss them a few ingredients, they can make it. And I think what your story gets at is that actually these chefs have all sorts of questions about how to do things. And if they want to expand their skill set, they don't always know what is the next thing to do, but chatbots are proving to be pretty good at that. And as you point out, those chatbots, they're extremely patient. You can ask them a question at any time of the day. And it sounds like the chefs have been pretty satisfied with the answers that they're getting.
I mean, more than one use the phrase out of the box as kind of what they go to it for, because they know what they know, right? And they know that zucchini and basil go together, right? And there are certain combinations that are just go-tos for chefs over and over. And what they can get out of ChatGPT is just something they'd never considered before. And for a chef, that's really valuable because they're in a high pressure, high volume environment. They're just every night it's a grind, and they've got to get the food out to the tables, and there is not a lot of time to just like sit and think. It's not part of the job. And when you're under pressure, of course you go to what you know. I know this is going to work. I've done it before. I'll just do it again. But if you do that too often, you start to seem like you're not thinking anymore. You start like whatever made you fresh and exciting to the world in the beginning starts to go away if you just rely on your proven, formulas.
But I think that's so interesting because one of the knocks on these AI tools is that their outputs can be sometimes generic because they're essentially sort of taking the statistical average of whatever data they were trained on. And this has always been my hesitation about using AI for cooking. I'm a home cook. I'm not a very good one, but I do use ChatGPT sometimes to sort of inspire myself. And I've just found that it often like recommends the most generic thing possible. It's like, oh, I have these 5 ingredients. What should I make? And it's like, it's not all that surprising. But maybe I'm just not good enough at prompting the models. Maybe the chefs who are spending serious time with these tools have figured out how to get more creative out of the box ideas out of them.
I think, I've started playing around with it just since I started reporting the story, and what I found is, yeah, the first response you get might be, like, yeah, thanks, I could have done that myself. But when you go back to it and say, like, no, not that, can you do better? You start to get interesting responses. I just, before we got on, was thinking about dinner, and I said, look, I've got, a couple fennel bulbs, I've got an onion, I've got some garlic, olive oil, a couple other things, can of sardines. What can I do for dinner? And it said, well, pasta with sardines and fennel. And I said, hey, I'm not so into the carbs. Like, what can we do that's lower? And then it gave me basically the same dish without the pasta, right? And I said, well, what if we don't cook the fennel? What if we just do a raw fennel? So I get a fennel salad. I said, oh, that looks interesting. Is there a way to take this in a Turkish direction? And then it started to get really interesting. It was like you could add some braised zucchini, you could add some fried eggplant. So the more I went back to it, and I never got annoyed. Like, hey, that recipe I gave you, that was a really good recipe. What's your problem, dude? Like, it will just keep batting the ball back at you, which is interesting. Like, the more specific you can be, the more surprising it will be.
Now, Pete, there has been a lot of resistance in creative fields to using AI. A lot of people in animation or art or music just think like this is taboo, that we shouldn't be allowing these things into our creative process. Did you find anything similar among chefs and people who work in restaurants? Is there sort of a cultural resistance to AI?
There's a huge cultural resistance. Although I think in some of those other fields, like animation in particular, like it has a lot to do with the fact that this thing can do their jobs now. It can do their jobs already. It can't really do what a chef does, not at the sort of high-end creative level that the restaurants I wrote about are dealing in. It's not there yet. But there's still a huge resistance just to the idea, to the romantic idea of that all of this stuff comes from the heart of the chef, who's this heroic figure standing on a mountaintop, and like lightning strikes him, and that's dinner. That bothers people. People are bothered by what they see as sort of the laziness of it, or the all of the famous like kind of crap that AI generates, like that. We don't want that crap in our food. It's actually really deep. I ran into a couple of food writers last night, and one of them walked up to me and said, "I hate that AI piece," and it was like not. I think not the way I wrote it, but the facts in it. I hate what the reality is that you reported.
Well, here's what I would say to that person. What's lazier, using AI to try to come up with a new dish or putting a flourless chocolate cake on your dessert menu?
Right. I mean, if what you want is to sort of a constant invention, reinvention, constant moving forward. Those ideas, they can come from anywhere.
Well, I have one question that's not actually about AI, but that it's on my mind, and I figured this would be a great time to ask the great Pete Wells about it.
Please.
Okay, Pete, so here's the story. So last night, if we use this, we should bleep out the name, but I went to Cafe in San Francisco. Wonderful institution. Went there with three folks, and we did, of course, ordered the famous chicken. But there were four of us, so we know we're gonna need a little something else. And so they had a ribeye on the menu, and it cost $90. We said, well, that's a lot of money for a ribeye, but you know what? There's four of us. It's a special occasion. Let's go nuts. We order the ribeye, and we order it medium rare because that's the proper temperature that you should order any piece of meat, in my opinion. So
no, you're right. This is factual.
Okay, thank you.
You heard it here.
You heard it here first. So the ribeye arrives, and we get into it, and it's rare. It is not medium rare. It is rare. And so, you hate to be those people. I never feel worse in my life than when I have to ask somebody in the service industry for help in this way. Right. But we keep looking at each other. We're like, we did pay $90 for this, and it feels like it should come at the temperature we ordered. So we say it's kind of rare. Okay, we'll put it back on the grill. Okay, so here are my questions for you, Pete. Number one, there was some controversy at my table because one person was surprised that they just grilled the piece of meat again, because by this point we've sort of hacked off half of it, and they sort of take away that piece of meat rather than bringing us a new one. So question one is that sort of the common way that this is addressed? And then number two is any sort of extra warranted in this? Is this a situation where the restaurant should throw in a free dessert or do sort of something nice? Or is that just hey, these things happen in the kitchen sometime. We're going to grill your damn steak a little warmer. Get over yourselves. Your thoughts?
Well, I didn't understand the first part of the question. Yes. They took some of the steak back, but not the entire steak?
Well, yeah, because we'd kind of hacked off a few pieces.
He's asking whether they should have given him and his friends a whole new ribeye.
That's right.
Ooh, that's a lot of. That's a lot of money for the restaurant, but it's a lot of money for you. Yeah. It's typical, especially with something like that, to just take the uneaten part and send it back to the kitchen. I don't believe I've ever seen a whole new steak come out of the kitchen.
That's
I've been
what
to a
I
lot
thought, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of
side.
steakhouses.
Okay.
And then, as far as doing something extra, no, they're not obligated. They are, I think, kind of obligated to get it right.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
This is what we ordered, and it's not what we ordered. And especially with something like that, where did it ruin your night to have a couple bites of rare steak, right? So I wouldn't call that a traumatic experience. When it gets into trauma,
wow, Casey, Pete Wells just said you and your friends, get over it.
That's great. Listen, this is exactly what I wanted. I wanted my expectations to be managed by a professional, and now they've been managed.
Right. Where I think if you're a certain kind of restaurant and you really want to go over and above, where you kind of need to send something out to the table or do something extra or knock something off the check is where they've kind of suffered a little bit. They waited 30 minutes, right? They waited 30 minutes for their steak or somebody spilled wine on them,
Okay. So in your view, something pretty major has to happen to get into the free dessert territory.
Yeah, you have to become sort of unhappy, right?
Yeah,
and it doesn't sound like you got there.
I will say, I didn't feel wronged, but I will say that, and not that we needed some grand apology or anything, but I was sort of expecting somebody would be like, oh, we're sorry about that. Let us take care of that. Just a sort of real quick thing. That didn't really arrive. And so that was just sort of curious to me. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely a service issue because you would hope your server would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, it's not the way you'd like it." Even if they don't admit wrongdoing,
exactly.
they don't have to say, "Oh my God, I can't believe they chefed it. I don't know what's going on back there." But just to say, I'm sorry, it's not what you were hoping for. Let me take care of that.
Instead, I felt like we were getting the looks oh, here we go with these people. It was one of it's it's one of these kind of tables.
Yeah,
they've got opinions about the meat temperature.
Yeah. Now, in my experience, that sort of very fine-tuned sense of hospitality of I'll apologize even if I don't think the restaurant's in the wrong. I'll apologize because it'll make them feel better. That is sort of what separates 95, 6, 7% of the restaurants from the really, really good, careful ones.
There you go.
So that's a rare experience, and you're lucky if you get it.
Yeah, no, the rare experience I had was that the steak was too rare.
Yeah,
so.
you were hoping for more of a medium rare
Yeah,
experience.
exactly. Let's just say it wasn't well done.
Pete, thank you so
Thank
much
you,
for
Pete.
coming. Great to have you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. I'm glad you thought to call me up.
Yeah. Well, we'd
Anytime.
love to have you back. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.